Alright, we're not talking about video games this time, but I think I can safely assume we're all geeky nerds here, right? Right? So today I thought instead we could talk about a TV show that some of you are probably aware of right now, but most of you haven't actually seen. I am of course talking about Star Wars Andor on Disney+. Now I'm going to come right out and say it, I think I've got Disney fatigue, and to be totally honest, I think I've had it for a few years now. Whether it's Star Wars or Marvel or some other bastardized live-action reboot of one of their animated classics, whenever they announce a new release these days, I just tend to shrug my shoulders and say, meh, it's not for me. I've seen it all before at this point. I have made a few attempts to dip my toe back into the proverbial Disney waters now and again, though often tend to wind up reaffirming my own preconceptions that, well, I just kind of don't care anymore. One of the most recent examples of this for me was, at the time of recording, probably Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. It seemed to have a lot going for it. Sam Raimi was at the helm, reviews were claiming it was bringing the horror genre into the MCU, and after the visual spectacle that was the first Doctor Strange film, I figured, why the hell not? Because I've seen it all before. That's why not, you idiot. Why do you always forget this? Why do you forget? You moron. Beyond a few small moments of character where, if you squinted, you could just about see Sam Raimi's influence trying to break through, it was just more of the same lazily written superhero fare we've grown so accustomed to. Not to mention some pretty questionable CGI in places. He's looking at that third eye. It's also a shame that for so many of the MCU's properties, you now need to have watched almost all of the other recent MCU properties to have any sodding clue as to what's actually happening. In this instance, you need to have seen WandaVision to get any kind of context regarding her backstory in Doctor Strange 2. Otherwise, you'd probably end up wondering why she suddenly turned into a big, giant, demonic villain all of a sudden. So, why am I talking about all of this? We're supposed to be talking about Andor, right? Well, the thing is, I was starting to feel the very same way about Star Wars as I have been about the MCU for quite some time, and I know I'm not alone in that. Plenty of video essay channels far superior to us in our humble little corner of the internet right here have been sharing a similar rhetoric more and more as the years have gone by. Let's face it, for the most part, the Star Wars sequel trilogy was an absolute train wreck. I mean, look at this. Look at this. What is happening? Why are we doing this? How did we fall this far? Sorry, I still get emotional. But it's not just about those films. Yes, they were mismanaged, yes, they didn't really feel like Star Wars, and yes, they and the myriad of average at best spin-off films certainly contributed towards franchise fatigue with their relentless release schedule, but I wanted to optimistically chalk that down to Disney getting to grips with the property, perhaps getting a little bit carried away, and attempting to run before they could even walk. In fact, the fatigue really began to set in for me, and I know this is going to be quite a controversial statement, around Season 2 of The Mandalorian. I know, I'm sorry, please, just put the pitchforks down. Don't lynch me just yet, just let me try and explain myself. Look, I enjoyed the first season of The Mandalorian. It was a very welcome change of pace following the aforementioned sequel trilogy and was clearly helmed by people that genuinely were passionate about the franchise. That passion gave the series a great amount of charm, and I think we were all just glad that we finally had something Star Wars related that wasn't a complete mess. The show was narratively quite simple, but that just made it easily likeable for both longtime fans of the franchise and of course new younger fans. There were plenty of fun little fan service moments, references and Easter eggs aplenty, and of course dozens of memorable characters that will go down in franchise history, not to mention make Disney lots and lots of money in the form of toys and figures. But then Season 2 came around and just kinda did the same thing. Sure, it had a bit more action, the set pieces were a little more grand, there were more characters, more references, but that was about it. If you loved Season 1, you'd probably still like Season 2. I did. I did like it, okay, I promise. I'm not saying it was bad, but just because something's not bad doesn't mean it's new, it doesn't mean it's exciting, it just plays it very safe. It's exactly the same as what was and is happening with the MCU. There's nothing especially daring or creative, although I do hear that that Werewolf Halloween special might be a standout. I haven't seen it yet. It's just good comfort food, and you can't eat comfort food all the time. Eventually, just like anything else, you're going to get used to it, and then you're going to get tired of it. Oh, we're on page 3 of 8. God help us. It didn't help, of course, that this was almost immediately followed by the Book of Boba Fett, and me, if the writing and characters were starting to get a bit stale in The Mandalorian, then my god, was it long past its sell-by date in this show. The plot goes absolutely nowhere, the sets offer no variety, Boba Fett isn't Boba Fett, something the actor himself agrees with. I know I'm not the first to say this, but the writers themselves clearly knew the show had nothing going for it, as halfway through it suddenly turned into Mandalorian Season 2.5, and he and Baby Yoda just sort of take over the whole bloody show. And again, that leads to the MCU problem, where if you watch Season 2 of The Mandalorian and then go to watch Season 3, you're going to be missing all the important plot details that play out in Boba Fett, because you assumed, like the rational human being that you are, that the Book of Boba Fett would be about Boba Fett. Sorry, I'm getting emotional again, aren't I? This is also a side note, but what happens in Mando Season 2.5 literally makes the whole point, the whole climactic episode of Season 2, sort of pointless. So far, the trailer for Season 3 is doing absolutely nothing for me, but that's probably a rant for another day. Next, we got the Kenobi series, and I could go on a rant, but I'll summarise by saying it had some okay moments, but was plagued by similar issues that Mando and Boba Fett suffered from, not to mention tons of wasted potential in the dynamic between Obi-Wan and Vader, and a misguided, messy subplot, some dodgy VFX, and weak action direction. So, you know, I didn't really like it that much. I mean, look at this. And this. What is happening? You and Hayden, where are you? Please, come back, please. So yeah, that's my little Kenobi review for you. Moving on. So then, right on schedule, along comes Andor, seemingly the latest in a long line of meh Star Wars shows. The marketing is clearly not being pushed as hard as other Star Wars content, and it's about some guy I forgot the name of in Rogue One, which, again, the film was fine, but its characters weren't exactly known for their highly developed three-dimensional personalities. So just like I do with the MCU nowadays, I shrug my shoulders and just say, what's the point? Why bother? I've seen it all before. Then I heard something from a friend, not long before the first episode aired actually. He mentioned that Andor, unlike much of The Mandalorian and Boba Fett, was being filmed on location, and helmed by different creators. I'll go into why this was important for me soon, but at the time that was enough to pique my interest, so with a sigh I once again said to myself, well, why not? How bad can it be? And as I live and breathe, dearest viewers, for the very first time in a very, very long time, I was not disappointed. I might even go as far to say that my expectations were, in fact, exceeded. Yes, you heard me right. Exceeded. Exceeded, I tell you. Right, so now we finally get into the positive part of the video where I actually talk about why you should just go and watch Andor already. Although, let me start right off the bat by saying, it's perhaps not one to recommend to your kids necessarily. My youngest brother is 12 and it didn't really click for him, and that's completely understandable because that's sort of the point. And in a way, it's part of what made Andor stand out amongst the rest of these Star Wars shows. Andor is, by design, a more mature take on the Star Wars universe we've come to know and love all too well at this point. Don't mistake that as it's trying to be edgy, it's not. No one's saying F Darth Vader or anything cringy like that, but what I mean by mature is that it's clearly targeted towards a more mature audience who will appreciate the nuances built into the show's narrative and, most importantly, its characters, whilst still appealing to that Star Wars fan within. I'd actually go a step further and say that you don't really need to even be that big of a Star Wars fan to enjoy Andor. If you like crime thrillers or sci-fi shows, Andor should still very much appeal to you. It might centre around a character from one of those spin-off films, but it's a prequel to that, so you don't need to have seen it, or any other Star Wars content for that matter. Sure, the Empire plays a big part in it, but they're framed in such a way that you understand what they are, what they stand for, and why they're an intergalactic threat within the context of the show itself. You could have absolutely no clue who Darth Vader is, and you would still fully understand the goals and motivations of the Empire from what this show sets up. The writing in this show is undoubtedly one of its greatest strengths, both in the way it drives the plot forwards and develops its characters. Given the issues with Rogue One, I honestly went into the show assuming that I'd never care about its leading man Cassian, and if I'm being truthful, after I'd seen episode 2, I still wasn't entirely sure. I was enjoying the show casually, though it hadn't quite hooked me by that point. But trust me, by the end of episode 3, I was in and I wanted more. Andor starts off as a bit of a slow burn, but it's all relevant setup, world building and introducing characters methodically, without throwing endless reams of exposition or references at you. Disney, being smart for once, clearly knew this and released the first 3 episodes at once, knowing it would take that many to show the viewers like myself what this series was going for and get them invested. You know that the showrunners were taking the writing seriously this time around because they actually brought in the appropriate talent with the appropriate experience to handle it. An example would be, and please just stay with me here, a scene in which Mon Mothma, who the show handles brilliantly by the way, talks politics with her guests. Yes, I know, politics in Star Wars. George Lucas didn't exactly set a high bar here, and Disney's social politics in the sequel trilogy are a touch heavy-handed, shall we say? But when I say politics here, I'm talking about more intimate political debates, personal deals, negotiations rooted in the character's own beliefs, and linked directly to the narrative's conflict. When I found myself actually enjoying these scenes, I couldn't help but question why. What's changed? Why is this suddenly engaging? Well, it probably had something to do with them bringing on writers from House of Cards, you know, one of the most successful modern political dramas of all time. That's what I mean when I say the showrunners were clearly taking the writing seriously. The main theme of the show, and arguably of the original Star Wars, is rebellion. Rising up against the oppressor, standing up for your beliefs, challenging authority. It is inherently political. If you think otherwise, you're either one of the younger members of the audience or you haven't really been paying enough attention. And so, if you're going to make a serious Star Wars show, you can't avoid it. It's going to be part of the theme. So why not hire writers who know politics? Andor understood this, and that's why, in my opinion, it's one of the first pieces of Star Wars media to actually succeed in this area. I appreciate some of you out there still aren't going to be into the politics, though. If you like Game of Thrones, I'm sorry to tell you that you've enjoyed a political show. So I should clarify that the show is not just a political drama. If the Star Wars films are war films, then this show examines the lives of those affected by that conflict. What is it like for regular people, not Jedi, to be ruled over by the Empire? How do they get by day to day? Does their desperation lead them to a life of crime and scavenging? Is there something more that they can do? In exploring this, Andor toys with a variety of genre tropes, whilst giving them that more mature Star Wars spin we talked about. In the first half of the show, several episodes focus around a heist mission, and it transforms rather seamlessly into a crime thriller. And then a few episodes later, we suddenly have a prison drama, the show taking inspiration from various escape movies. This all, of course, is happening in and amongst the political drama and the spy espionage thrillerish activities established earlier on. This might sound like a lot to cover, but it's all linked by a central theme. Crime and politics go hand in hand, and for rebellion to begin, they're two key ingredients you can't avoid. And, continuing that same train of thought, crime and politics are not black and white. Let's face it, Star Wars establishes pretty quickly who the good guys are and who the bad guys are, and save for a little family drama shifting the tides here and there, it doesn't really explore anything beyond this. And that's fine, the original trilogy wasn't trying to explore the morality of war or anything like that. But it's been a few decades since that trilogy now, and it's about time the franchise decided to explore, well, something else, right? So in comes Andor with its morally grey characters, making questionable, though often justified decisions, and keeping the audience on their toes with regards to who they think they know and who they think they can trust. We've seen fiction explore the space between good and evil plenty of times, but it's great, and indeed refreshing, to finally see it explored properly in Star Wars, which has so often kept this sort of thing pretty simple, you know, for the kids and all that. Cassian, with hands so fast he'd make Clint Eastwood think twice, kills several characters in cold blood. Luthen, played by the always incredible Stellan Skarsgård, and Mon Mothma each have their own scenes where their morals are pitted against their goals and brought under scrutiny. Seriously, if you don't stick around for Skarsgård's monologue towards the end of the show, you have missed out. It's legitimately fantastic. Whilst the show delves into what it would be like to live in, bluntly, a galactic-sized police state, there are still likeable and dislikable characters on both sides. Dedra is clearly more of a villain, but she's not a cartoon, she's a person. You can't help but respect her drive, her ambition, her intelligence. You start rooting for her as she begins to climb the Imperial ladder, and look forward to seeing how she'll fare when she comes face to face with our heroes. Likewise, you have Cyril, who you just can't help but feel a bit sorry for. He just wants to progress his career, do things by the book, and in his eyes, make a positive change. Okay, he's working for the Empire, but to him, he's just doing his job and standing up for what he believes is right. When the show can make you understand the character's perspective, even though you personally don't agree with it, that's good writing, that's good television. The characters in Andor feel like real people, and by extension, they talk like real people. George Lucas, God bless him, wasn't the best, being kind, at writing dialogue, though it did give his characters this poetic charm, when it was at its best at least.
I don't like sand.
The sequel trilogy then, of course, tried to give its characters the MCU treatment and make them all wisecracking caricatures of themselves.
Hi, I'm holding for General Hugs.
But in Andor, people just talk and act like people. I can't explain it much better than that. Occasionally they might stutter, occasionally they might curse, again nothing too cringy or explicitly vulgar, just casual everyday curses. Sometimes it's implied that they even do the, you know, bed-related adult things. Shocking, right? It keeps these things subtle so as not to take you out of the experience and go, wait, they did that in Star Wars? It's all just helping build a believable real world, one that is relatable to its audience, touching on real world themes like police brutality, without shoving it in your face like other properties have in the past. Here's looking at you, Han Solo. Right, I've talked to death about the themes and all of that, so let's move on to the more technical filmmaking on display here. I mentioned before that one of the things that made me give Andor a try was hearing that it was shot on location. For those of you that don't know, this means that scenes were all largely shot in real-world places, with real set dressing and all that fun stuff, rather than being shot in a big green screen studio or indeed something like The Volume. Don't get me wrong, The Volume is an incredible innovation in filmmaking technology and is bound to open up countless opportunities for filmmakers for generations to come. That being said, it still has its limits. If you weren't aware, most of The Mandalorian, Boba Fett and Kenobi were shot using The Volume. To put it very simply, The Volume is essentially a massive, super high-res screen that can display rendered backgrounds in real time and adjust the perspective based on the movements of the camera being used in studio. I'm being very simplistic about how it works here, but that's the gist. This is of course far more immersive for everyone on set, as they can see where they're pretending to be instead of just floating around in the middle of a green screen. It also happens to be why the reflections look so good in Mando's helmet, because they're pretty much real. So, how is The Volume limiting? Well, if you watch The Mandalorian again, you may notice that there's never a whole lot of interaction with the environment. It's not often that the camera moves in and amongst and around the set. We don't get tons of extras on screen, milling around, passing by the foreground, interacting with the background. A lot of the characters' blocking is limited to a few light steps here and there. It all just feels a little bit static after a while. And that's because, at the end of the day, you're just in one big fancy room with a screen. I'd certainly say they've utilised that space well, but you just don't have the same filmmaking opportunities in that space as you do out in the real world, where you essentially have limitless space to play within. I'm being a little bit reductive in my descriptions here, but trying to keep it brief. Hopefully you get what I mean. In Andor, the sets feel alive, they feel tangible. We move from inside to outside, we race down streets, sweep over hills. Technology and the Unreal Engine has come a long way, but it's still not the real thing, and I still subscribe to the fact that, even if only on an unconscious level, we humans can tell the difference. Of course, Andor still uses sets and green screens, just like most other shows, but the key difference is it does not rely on them. If you ask me, over-reliance on the studio can lead to lazy filmmaking. Companies like Disney can utilise them as much as they want, keeping costs low and making it nice and easy to keep churning out show after show, which often leads to poorly planned productions with weak writing and a lack of creative flair. By some miracle, this was not the case with Andor, and they actually let creators go outside and figure things out for a change. So, pair this on-location approach with some beautiful cinematography and competent VFX, and you start to get a show that actually looks and feels pretty good. Most of the special effects in Andor are either subtle or have narrative purpose, and are therefore required in order for the plot to make sense. Take the spectacle in the skies of Aldhani, for instance. If the show wants to populate the frame, it will attempt to do it with something real first before it resorts to VFX, be that the set, props, actors, or whatever. Even the colour grading is a step up from what we're used to. There's a dark, moody grittiness to it. It feels sharp and dirty. Just how I like it. Wait. So, pair this on-location approach with some beautiful cinematography and competent VFX, and you start to get a show that actually looks and feels pretty good. Overall, Andor does a great job of being its own unique thing, while still simultaneously feeling at home within the wider Star Wars universe. References and fan service are kept to a minimum, and I wouldn't even categorise Mon Mothma being a character as a reference. She's an important character, integral to the plot, and she's an ideal character to steal, so to speak, from the wider universe, because she's not one that's ever been given any real attention before. The show doesn't concern itself with trying to interlink itself with the rest of the franchise. It has confidence in what it is and focuses on developing its own world. I might be wrong, but I don't think a Jedi's ever even mentioned. As you can probably tell from how much I've just waffled on, I like Andor. I know I spent a lot of time ranting about Disney and other MCU or Star Wars properties, but I feel like that context was needed so that you could more clearly understand just why Andor surprised me so much. I don't mean to overhype it, it's not a perfect show, no show is. Like I said, it does start off a little slow, but if you stick with it, you'll see it's just so much better than what we're used to being served over and over again by Disney. All the way through watching it, whenever I spoke with my friends, I'd just keep asking, how did they do this? What's changed? Why couldn't they have done this before? Whatever the answers may be, I'm just happy we finally got a show like this. From what I understand, there will be a second season coming out next year, which was already planned when the show was commissioned, and then that'll be it. And whilst I'll be sad that the show has come to an end, I'll simultaneously be glad that they aren't going to milk it dry until it just becomes another soulless cash cow. Something I really hope The Mandalorian doesn't eventually become. No, I'm not saying it is right now, but this is Disney we're talking about. Who knows what could happen. The greatest tragedy is that so few people seem to be talking about this show right now. Part of me wonders if it's because of the fatigue I mentioned, and Cassian doesn't have the star power or iconic appeal that other Star Wars properties have leached off. How more time and effort was put into this show than Kenobi baffles me from a corporation point of view, but there we go. Whilst the show is clearly more for an adult audience, many adults will probably assume, it's Star Wars, it's for kids, whilst kids might check out the first episode and go, what the hell is this, where's all the lightsabers and lasers and stuff? As far as I'm aware right now, Andor is not making enough money, and that's sad because I know so many long-time Star Wars fans out there who have been craving this kind of content for quite some time now. There are several generations of Star Wars audiences out there that have all grown up now and are ready to see the franchise take risks and go in a different direction. We've literally been asking for it, and no one's watching it. How can we keep blaming Disney for not taking risks and continually churning out the same thing over and over again if we don't offer them some reward, for lack of a better word, when they actually try something new? I'm hoping that eventually word will spread and people will discover the show, perhaps when Season 2 starts airing. With a bit of luck, Disney might see that there is demand out there, and if they just keep trying, they could be onto something great for both us and them. When I finished Andor, I felt, feelings and stuff. The climactic final episode was not only action-packed, but emotionally gratifying as well. There's a speech given at the end, I won't spoil anything, that was, quite frankly, stirring. It was a genuinely satisfying ending to a great first season, and I actually came away feeling inspired. I was happy. Not just because I enjoyed the show, but because it was also a Star Wars show. It had been so long since the franchise had made me feel anything quite like it. I knew I had to make a video about this. There's plenty of criticism out there for the latest Disney shows, and that's needed, of course. I agree with a lot of it, but I've never had the strength to make my own video critiquing any of it because, I just don't get enough from it to even try. That's why it's important to acknowledge the good when it's there. We watch these shows to be entertained, to escape, to feel, and I can happily say that Andor succeeded in doing just that. So that ends my big old ramble on Andor. Hopefully you've managed to stick with me this long. If you have, thank you very, very much. Fingers crossed you've either seen the show or you're going to go and watch the show after you've seen this video, because maybe I've inspired you to go and watch it, who knows. And if you do, or if you have, then why not leave your thoughts on the show yourself in the comments below? That would be great. We can chat away, or Cam can chat with you because he manages the old chat a bit more than I do. I look at it, I read it. I see you all out there. I see you all. But yeah, a little bit different to our usual gaming videos. Obviously, still very much nerdy, geeky sci-fi stuff. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and we'll be right back with another video in a week or two. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next one.